My apologies for the slightly late start. It's the problem of having another meeting scheduled immediately before this one, which ran its full allotted 1 hour and a bit, maybe. Right, first item on the agenda is to receive apologies for absence. I'm aware of apologies from Councillor Glenn and also from Councillor Fuller.
Yeah.
Do we accept those apologies?
Yeah.
Thank you. Now, before we actually start the main business of the evening, the next item on the agenda says representation of interested parties. Now, on the agenda there are actually 2 speakers. I'm aware that actually there are 3, potentially, and I'm aware that one of the 2 speakers is now going to try and wear 2 hats as well. But we'll start with where the agenda starts with, which is Mark Benz from Paul Bancroft Architects and Aldel Osteopaths, who wants to talk to us about a previous planning decision. Now, just before I do that, let me remind councillors of what is in our planning guidance. Because we have a little heading under requests to the committee to reconsider a previous response to a planning application. And it says this: generally the committee should not agree to a request to reconsider a decision previously reached in relation to a planning application. The committee should, however, do so if requested to do so by the planning authority. It should also do so if the decision was made on the basis of a misunderstanding of the nature or detail of the application, or as a result of any misunderstanding of relevant planning law or guidance, including the Council's own planning guidance. The committee may do so in the event that new material or information not available to it at the time of the original decision becomes available to the committee, and it appears that had it been available earlier, it might have made a material difference to the decision reached. Which gives us a fair amount of scope to hear, and then in due course to consider what, if anything, we do. So can I call upon Mark Benz, first of all, to speak to us about that?
Yeah, firstly, I'd like to apologise for the planning system. Planning system
I don't think it's your fault, Mark.
Change of use denotes that you actually only have to fill out a form for something as simple as a change of use. It came abundantly clear from your decision, with all the greatest respect, that you probably didn't have all the facts. The facts being that or the fears that I read between the lines were that this could be a medical practice of 40 or 50 people sitting in a waiting room to meet GPs, and parking would inevitably become a problem. Therefore, the application was correct in the way we put it together. Aldel Osteopaths were not. We spoke about it. It was my advice not to go public on who the applicant was in terms of the practice, because we didn't want to scaremonger that the practice was leaving out or potentially changing because it is an established business. However, subsequent to your recommendation for refusal, it became evident that we needed to sort of out basically that it was the practice, and basically it's a relocation from one building to another. So the existing building where Aldel Osteopaths is primarily a residence. It has never had a change of use. So it's been established for 20 odd years. So just from usage, it has dual usage. It's a dwelling essentially, and that will become the primary residence for the dwelling. And the idea is to find a suitable location, and Aldel Osteopaths has been looking for a number of years for an ideal location. Priest House came up, and as we know from the Priest House, that's been used as a community room or a meeting room for a number of years, and actually trades similarly to Aldel Osteopaths and has that group usage. Therefore, I didn't for any one moment imagine that you as a group would have an issue with that, but clearly there was insufficient information. So that is why I'm here today with Aldel Osteopaths, and just hope you could ask some questions and reconsider your position on that.
I'm just trying to look and see whether it's specifically on the agenda. I mean, if it isn't, it ought to be, so, because there's not much point in having the discussion if we don't put it on. Didn't actually specifically put it on. what I think we might do, bearing in mind we've got some representations, normally the order we take it in is representations from members of the public, then we start going through the planning applications in the order that they appear on here. What I think we could do is we'll hear the other representations from interested parties, in which you can wear another hat to speak to us again. So you might as well not move. And then we'll look at the Stoke Hill thing, because our first decision has to be, do we look at it again or not? And then the second decision would be, if we did look at it again, would we change our mind? And if so, where we go with it? Councillor Oates.
I suggest that we actually deal with that particular one first.
What
And
you
get
do
it out of the way.
Get it out of the way.
Personally,
Do other councillors feel that we should do it that way?
I'm fine with that.
I have no issue one way or t'other.
Yeah, no, I think we should, I agree with Neville, we should
Okay.
just go on and get it sorted now.
Right.
Get off.
So,
may I just say, I have no objection to the proposal.
right. Just so, partially for the benefit of those who are present physically and also those who might listen to this subsequently, on our agenda we did publish what we said about the objection. So I'll just read it out so that we all remember what we said. It's only a month ago. The Council objects to the change of use to D1. Whether the property is used as a health clinic or other D1 use, there will be A, people working there, and B, other people visiting there. It is reasonable to assume that most of these will travel to the location, to the premises by car. There is no on-site parking for staff and none for patients or clients, etc. There is inadequate on-street parking in the vicinity, and the use of the former drill hall car park for this purpose would not be appropriate, even if there were sufficient space available there. There is therefore likely to be a problem with car parking if a change of use takes place. There may also be issues with traffic and road safety given the proximity of an Arundel School boarding house and the Roman Catholic Church. The location is only suitable for residential use. So that's what it said. And you've heard me read out our previous guidance, so we have to make a decision as to whether or not there was some form of misunderstanding of the nature or detail of the application, etc. And the only observation I would make is, of course, although this is an application by a particular person for a change of use for a particular purpose that that person wants to put it to, once the use has been changed, then that is the use of the building, and anything that falls within that use class, and Mark will stop me if I'm wrong, thereafter would be okay. So if the person who originally sets it up subsequently moves on, somebody else could take it over, run it in the same use class, but it could be run as a different kind of thing, which might have different implications. And I think that's probably a fair comment. And I think
you can make that assumption. I think the risk is with that assumption, or the facts are that the building is only a certain physical size. So, you know, it is not a medical practice as, you know, on my assumption again, I'm making the assumption that you've looked at this, and we're talking about 4 or 5 people visiting per hour. It is not much larger than that. You could probably squeeze 6 an hour, 7 an hour if you really push the rooms. That's less than a coffee shop does in half an hour. So I think we need to put it into context that the space, the size of that building, it currently holds 20 people in a meeting, mind you. It will have 20 currently, and those people are not going to be rehousing in there, so we're gaining parking spaces there, arguably. You know, I would suggest that the size of the building is not the size of the medical practice across the way. That way. Yeah, it's dark. You know, we're not. It's just not. It could never really be on that scale, even if it was a dentist or something. I mean, it's just not going to be.
Now is that, because of this, I did trundle up and down to have a look at the use of the drill hall car park. And on occasion it's very busy, but mostly it isn't.
But it's a public car park.
And it isn't.
I
accept that, but I'm saying bluntly that I don't think we should object to this from my perspective. And I've looked at it in a number of different ways, from a planning perspective, and for something, a place where it's not the sort of thing that's really going to make an awful lot of difference to the way Ansell operates as it is.
Well,
I think probably because it is an unusual situation, I would like to get feedback from all councillors. So simply because you're next round the table, I'll go to you next.
I actually
councillor.
attend the osteopaths as it currently is, and I would say you're quite right that there's only maybe 2 people at a time, that myself and someone else in there. There's quite a few rooms where you are, I think.
It's the same number of rooms, but
Yeah.
these would be ground floor rather than making
I didn't know last time it came to the table that it was the Amble Osteopaths. I thought it was going to be a big medical centre.
Right.
So
that is my apology for the planning system, because
Yeah.
we don't differentiate.
So I had it as a surgery, or I don't know.
So your view is,
My
if
view
you
is-
like, that we have now got more information and therefore would be, if we follow our own guidance, entitled to review our decision
I think
if we
so.
thought that we
I
should.
think
Yeah,
so.
I think
So I'll carry on round for the
I'm
moment.
not quite clear how many people will be operating from the premises.
The idea is that there'll be 4, possibly 5 maximum practitioners,
but
so
not necessarily all at the same time.
not all at the same time, so you're talking about 4 patients, maximum 5 patients at any one time, and that's every 40 minutes, so I mean it's less than could go into a busy household. You know, it's not a
Can I ask this, I mean, bearing in mind what we're talking about is specific for the moment, where they are now, do the people who actually work there park on site there, or are they parking elsewhere in the
Parking
town
elsewhere.
anywhere?
they park in town.
Some of our staff work and walk, they live in Amble.
Yeah.
Yeah, John.
Thanks.
So what was the answer to that?
I think the short answer is there isn't any more on-site car parking there than there is here.
And
But a lot of people don't travel by car anyway, who work there because they're local people. I think that summarised what we just said. Councillor Humphreys, just looking at this initial point or asking any questions.
No, it's not an expansion, is it?
no,
As such,
It's
it's
a
a change of
it's a change of,
premises.
it's a change of
So you're not
premises.
looking as a business to expand the business and take on more clients and more practitioners.
Currently, some of our patients have to go upstairs
That's right.
to upstairs treatment rooms, and that's becoming more of an issue as our patients get older and less able.
Yeah,
So we'd like to have a different configuration of the same number of rooms.
So, right, that's right. Yeah, okay. That's
Disabled toilet downstairs instead of patients having to go upstairs.
I mean, that would be the concern, because that would, you know, that would in fact would strengthen our argument, if anything, if it was an expansion.
And it's not as well as what we're doing, it's instead of where we are.
Yeah, and I think, and I must point out that it's the planning problem. It caused this, in some ways, a slight misunderstanding that is running through.
It was evident from what I read that you had seen it as much larger premises, and that was why.
I think the initial, certainly from my point of view, when it said health clinic, it was some sort of massive boots, paediatric, something or other, you know.
We also have to,
taking over.
again, because you have to give it a group category, a usage, you have to group it into something which, it's the quirk of the planning system, it's just very difficult to do that. In hindsight, which is a wonderful thing, I could have written a letter of description and we could have declared everything and said it is Amble Osteopath moving from there to there.
That would have solved it.
And it would have solved it, as far as I'm concerned.
And I think, yeah, just as a point of view, and it's nothing to do with planning, because we must just look at the planning application here. But on an aside to that, I think everyone owes Amble Osteopaths a huge gratitude, because the number of backs you've solved and problems you know, if you sort of disappeared, it would be a problem. But that's nothing to do with planning.
I am getting a feeling that what people are saying is that had they known what we now know, we might, or certain individuals at any rate, might well have taken a different view.
Yes.
So I think we've probably passed our first hurdle, in as much as we would be able to reopen it. And the practical effect would be that if we did reopen the discussion, were we to take a different view, obviously the first thing we need to do is make sure that we tell ENC that in the light of further information we've received, we have amended our response from X to Y. Now, I guess that the only question mark that is in my mind is this one of, well, it's fine, we know what Oundle Osteopaths is, we can see, therefore, what the impact might be. It is probably a lot less than we perhaps thought it was capable of being when we took a look at this before. My only worry is, well, all right, but if in due course it passes into other hands and it has that use, would we then see the sort of impact that we were worried about? Now, the thing that perhaps, again, maybe we hadn't taken sufficiently on board is the physical size of the premises, because I think we might have been envisaging that there was perhaps rather more space, and therefore if it was taken over by somebody else, we might have the sort of situation that Sense, our planning response, suggested.
Assurance. There is another thing that, again, quirk of planning, and we did speak to the case officer before putting the application, because that building has been used as a meeting hall for in excess of 10 years, we could have submitted a certificate of lawful development, of which you wouldn't have even seen it, which would have given us the use that we wanted. And then you have no, because it's been used for in excess of, you know, for that use, so we could have got the numbers. You know, it's... So all I would say is that could have been achieved and can be achieved at
In a different
so
way.
actually this is probably safeguarding you in a better way by approving. It's planning system. I mean, we're into the realm of it's.
If, and I'm merely flying a kite because I'm not sure where this is going, but of course the planning authority could it not, grant a planning permission in the terms of a change of use, but make it personal to the current applicant so that the benefit of that change of use wouldn't continue.
It goes to the building, doesn't it?
Mm. But it's rather like if there's a house with an agricultural restriction on it, then it can only be sold to somebody employed in agriculture.
I mean, I don't think we would have, we wouldn't have an issue with that, but I don't think the plans can do that.
Right. The short answer is I don't know if it could be done on a change of use, I must admit. I'm
And the
not sure.
only other thing to add, and I will put this to you now because it may influence the way you respond, but the planners do have an objection from highways, because highways object to absolutely every application nowadays, about parking.
Yes.
So the case officer still has to make a judgment, and can only make a judgment on a positive outcome from this meeting. So that is rather important.
Okay.
So, you know, parking will always determine the final use of that. So if it ever became something more grand, or you know, it's got to have the parking facilities there. So I don't think there's an issue.
Rather than, in a sense, carry on the discussion, because I think I can see where we're going. First of all, can I just take by a show of hands all those in favour of us agreeing to reconsider at this point? Right, well that's unanimous. In that case, and again I think I can see where we're headed, is the view that we should inform ENC that having received further information from the applicant that we withdraw our objection? Because that's where we're going.
I would propose that, Chairman.
Okay,
I'll second it.
right, that's 2. Well, that's 2-4, so at the moment I'm looking over there because if there's one more in favour we don't need to go any further. You agree? Fine. I think that would therefore be the decision. You have actually broken new ground. That is the first time in my experience that we have ever changed our mind. I dare say that perhaps we've all learned something from that, and one of them is, and I can see why perhaps you were perhaps a little reticent the first time. I think if you're ever confronted with the same situation, you can't give us too much information, you can leave us with too little.
Absolutely.
Right.
Thank you.
Now, as it happens, I think you also want to talk to us about 87 South Road, don't you?
Yes, do you want me to do it before and then?
I think so, because-
After?
Well, I think if things have changed, which is what you're intimating to me they have,
It's whether I can explain it without you actually having it presented to you in the first instance.
would you find
Because
it...
all I wanted to do is to suggest why we've made a number of changes, which is sort of it's.
All right, well, I'm going to do this in a slightly
Let's do
different...
it.
I think we'll do this in a different way to what we normally do. Why are you setting a precedent for everything being different? This is the first meeting of 2020 and it is not going the way they normally do. I'm going to make a suggestion, I know how easy it would be. Can you get to that application?
Which one?
The one we're talking about, 89 South Road.
Second one, never.
Yeah, can we
No,
go...
89 South
89.
Road.
89 South.
Yeah, so that's the second one on your list, basically.
Okay.
Can we go straight to it? Can you...
Excuse me, I'm going to stop at the moment. I've spoken to the people.
Yeah.
Yeah, this actually.
Can we...
I've spoken to both the neighbours about this on the other side. It would have been nice if I'd been able to meet people who actually were proposing to develop this particular site. I've not been able to do that. Now, my initial question is, should you wish to speak about it before I put what I've got on the screen,
Well, I'm thinking...
or
If what you've got on the screen is actually going to be amended by what Mr. Benz is able to tell us, then it would make sense to understand
right,
how it's been changed
may I
before you
say,
go any further.
may I say, Mr. Chairman, that normally, obviously, you've got to tap the gavel and turn the meeting off as people speak, and then tap it again, bring it on. I'm quite happy, from my point of view, for people to comment on this as I go through it. Would that be acceptable?
Well, I think what we should do is we'll do your presentation. I'll let Mr. Benz explain to us if there have been changes. We'll then suspend the meeting temporarily to enable those who told us they wanted to talk about this in the first place, Mr. Jakeways and potentially Ms. Upton as well, and then we'll do our deliberation on it. So if you can do the presentation.
I'm quite happy with that. Right. The important thing for me to say up front is that I've done this from what was presented in terms of the planning application. But also, I've spoken to the people who live either side, and therefore I've got a little bit more info, which I've been able to sort of put in. But I've also put in a few bits of assumption, which are missing from the planning application. So, if that's all right.
Possible for us, I'm so sorry to interrupt, Ruben.
What
Could we move
Do you
over
want,
this?
of course you can.
Oh, yeah.
Help yourself to some chairs and move around so you can see.
You can sit on my lap if you like.
Well,
Right.
okay.
It does also occur to me, just as a point of practicality, once we've done this, once Mr. Benz has done his bit, once others have spoken,
Yeah.
before we actually consider the planning application, we better do declarations of interest
yeah.
because we haven't actually done it. We
We
must
have-
do it before we start deciding anything.
Well,
But we can
the
do
one-
this first, so
Yeah,
carry on.
okay, the one for East Road,
Yeah.
the person
Yeah.
who is...
I'm not doing the declarations of interest yet, but I will
Sorry,
do.
okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, just do the presentation.
Do the presentation then.
Go do the next if you wish.
Yeah.
No,
No, not yet.
Right,
We're not ready for it.
I'm lost.
Yeah,
Right,
we've
okay,
strayed off the
upside
agenda.
down here.
South Road.
Right, we're doing my usual silly thing to start with. Right, so we're looking at a replacement of a two-storey dwelling. And so therefore we have a look at this. And there it is. And it's in the midst of three, as you can see. And that's really quite important to understand where it sits, not just as a single entity. Okay, I'm putting up the points of the compass because they're quite important in a way, because you need to know what faces what. Okay, this is the current street scene, which I photographed, and you can see the number 89 in the middle is where we're looking at the development that's proposed. 91 is firmly on its way, having achieved planning permission some time ago, and number 87 sits very close to number 89. Okay, the development next door, that's the one on the right. This is Mr. and Mrs. Lupton's application, and I put it in blue because I'm not talking about the one that we're talking about, I'm just talking about the development that was approved. So that was a photograph of the bungalow, and then they, again, these properties are not in a listed area or conservation or whatever. Okay, permission was granted for that particular property, and you can see from that things have moved on a bit. Okay, the number 89 is next door to the left. This, which is the development that we're going to be looking at, and that's just a silly idiosyncratic thing I put in. It's all about, apparently, you can have a chimney stack, but you know, you have to block them off now. Bit weird, but there we go. Now, the number 89 proposal, which is what we're going to be looking at, is a similar copy of number 91, this one, at the front. You know, the front facade that actually looks over onto South Road. Is it? Here we go. So, we're now looking not at this application, but we're looking at now the site plans for the original property at 91 and its proposal, and you've seen the development of that, or the rebuild of the site already in place. But what we're looking at is number 89, which is in the middle of the three. Okay, I keep putting up compass points here though, because you get really confused with this. I'll just leave that for a minute, just so we can absorb it. The west of 89, it goes left, if you like, towards 91. The east side, on the other side, faces the west of 87, which is one of the three in a row. Okay. Now, this is where I've done a bit of diggery pokery here, without trying to be informative, but not necessarily accurate. If you look at that, you'll see that the red line indicates the rear building line of the development of 91, which is in the course of construction, compared with the building lines which might apply to the property we're looking at in the middle and number 87 on the right hand side. Are we okay with that? Do I need to leave that up any longer? Because it does get very complicated. This, I go 89 working. Okay, you happy? Right, good. Okay. This is a recent photo of number 89. Now, this is largely irrelevant because all it is, well, it's a bungalow. But that's what it is, that's what it looks like at the moment. That's number 87 that's next to it. Okay. And I'm just putting this in because we had issues about the walls previously, about whatever. And the application indicates there would be some reduction in the length of the wall to make sure that larger vehicles of a modern type can get in and out. Okay, this is a photograph of the number 87. Now 87 is on the left of the three that you were looking at, and you can see from that the proximity between 87 and 89. Okay, don't go and have a look at what the building that's proposed might mean if the bungalow was demolished and the proposal was erected in its place. So we're looking at that. Widened entrance, parking for 3 cars. So we always look at, as a councillor, you know, what the effect on parking might be. So we always look at that. Now, I've now done, probably a bit cheeky, but that's the approximate placing of a building line, the rear building line, extrapolated from the development of number 91. That's the property that's under construction at the moment, and I've taken that from the back of where they propose to go into the back garden. Right. We're talking now proposed plans and elevations. Okay. This is why I keep putting up the compass points, and because you have to know which is north, which is south, and whatever. But first of all, we're looking at that. Now that's a proposed glass balcony. Now, if you look at it, you'll see from the top left that it's south-facing. Indeed, that is the south-facing. Now, when you get to the east side, that's the end of that balcony, and presumably that will be glassed as well. So therefore, you know, it offers the opportunity for people to invade others' privacy because they can do so. But it's pretty limited. Okay. Now let me get into the stairwell. Now the stairwell is a feature there, and because clearly the people would like to have their stairwell well lit in certain ways. So the proposal is that they put some glass frontage on that part of the dwelling in order to assist people in finding their way up the stairs, and also to provide a reasonable outlook for them. Okay, right. I've had a quick look at roof heights. The proposed, I call it the rear addition because it's the bit that's at the back of the building that's going to front South Road. The height addition is slightly higher, as proposed, as I see it, than the building facing South Road. That in itself is possibly not particularly important, but I'll just put it up there just so you can see. Next. Okay, this is from the plans. This is an idea of the artist's view from South Road, okay, of the property. Right, so there it is, pretty straightforward. That's where 87 is, to the left. And 91 is just the place that's being reconstructed at the moment, or constructed. Now, the general design of the front facade, which looks onto South Road, it matches number 91. It's not exactly the same, but it's got the same sort of vista and appearance. Right, the other thing, they got that slightly wrong because the wall will be retained, and that's where the proposed driveway access will be. Okay. The other thing is just to say that the house will be set back a bit further than the original bungalow. So, and that actually really corresponds with the property at number 91, which is having people digging holes there and stuff. Okay, let's have a look at views. Okay, this is actually from number 87, that's the one to the left if you're looking at it from the front, over towards number 89 and 91. Now, as you can see, you can't really see a great deal, but there is sort of a line of sight between. If you look, there's a large Leylandii to your right, then you'll see a smaller little wee thing next to it, and that's more or less, roughly, where number 91's gardening or extension is going to go. Right, now, this is what number 87 would see. Okay, so they're now looking at the east side of the development. And as you can see, it comprises a single story, and it's been described as a veranda. I don't think it's a veranda, I think it's more of a walkway, but that was the description. Okay, now that is the approximate line of depth into the garden of the rear of 89. It's the best that I can do, okay? So you must understand, this, I'm playing about with 3 different plans here. I'm trying to actually work out how this would look. But you'll see it extends considerably into the garden of number 87 and would run across to 91, but would be much deeper than the garden at 91. Are we okay so far?
Yeah, so, Councillor Oates, can I just say that
Yeah, please.
the photo that I'm just going to point to, it should be...
I can go backwards and forwards.
No, it's all right, just because it's quite small when you're sitting over there. But that coin there is actually the end of our building, so I can confirm that to you, that is where the building stops. And that is the top of it as well, so that is its finished height.
Brilliant, thanks.
That's a single story.
It's a single story,
Yeah.
deliberately.
But I've got it reasonably right, you think?
Yeah, no, it's as the photo depicts, yeah, it is exactly where it is.
Okay, I'm happy. This would be quite a labour of love, this one. Right. Now, this is the approximate height to the eaves. Now, we're now looking at the impact upon 87 here. Now, that is, as best I can guess, all right, the kind of height they're looking at, which is going to run into the garden of number 87. That's the one on the left, okay? Now, that's the approximate height, and you can see that from there, because I've only done it, and I've taken actually the distance of number 87, 2 stories, just transplanted it across. Now, I'm not able to map the position of the roof top and also the roof slope, because I couldn't work out how, when the frontage had been moved back X number of yards, feet, whatever, so I could work out that when the roof came down, whether any part of the top of the roof would have been appearing there. I think possibly not. I think possibly the top would maybe, well, I don't know. Actually, that's something that I find very irksome. I just couldn't work that one out. I admit it. Okay. Now, the other thing is just another important bit in a way, is that we do have this glass frontage, which would head towards number 87. And it's designed to give light to the winding staircase there. Okay. Now, just a sort of thing, it says on there, but I looked at it, it's a single story. It's apparently it's a veranda, which I thought was rather funny, but there we go. I don't know what the ground floor height is, because verandas, as described, you would say, they're usually raised things. They're not necessarily at ground level. But I suspect this is more of a walkway than a veranda. But I don't have enough information to know, because it's not in the plans and elevations, etc., that tells me that it would be anything other than at ground level. But there we go.
obviously without any discussion with anybody who knows, it's obviously very difficult. But the fact that there are 3 or 4 sets of patio doors on the first level that are not encompassed in that balcony, obviously you can't have a set of patio doors at first level that are either not, you know, barricaded off for safety, because you're going to open the doors and where are you going? If it's not an upstairs balcony, what is it? So we've assumed that it's a balcony because it is not closed off. Because obviously if you're not, you know, on a first story, you put in windows so that you can't step outside. If you put in doors, the inference is that you're going to step outside. Unless you mark it off with some sort of Juliet balcony, and there is no Juliet balcony marked on those plans.
Would you like to put the rear elevation up, Neville?
Sorry?
Would you like to put the rear elevation up and I can explain?
Rear elevation.
The south elevation.
Sound
A minute. There we go.
That's the
I think
north.
that one,
That's the north.
you know,
Right there.
what?
No.
So it's
That's
there.
Top,
It's there, top
left.
Yeah, south rear
I
elevation.
mean, they're just large windows. They're not doors. They look like doors, but they're just large windows.
But they go all the way to the floor.
But it's sloping. It's a sloping. It's got a very slight slope on it. Essentially it's a flat roof.
May I
It's a flat roof
say,
that you can walk on.
may I say, I read it as just being a roof.
Which is just a roof.
But again, we're back to what we had earlier. Do I have all the information?
Well, the plans actually show a sloped roof, if you look at the...
Yep, no, I agree.
And it quite clearly.
I read it as a
the
roof.
balcony. I mean,
And the description of the actual structure says it's a non-walkable roof, really.
Right. Mr Bend, this is your opportunity to tell us anything over and above what you just said that you think we might need to take into account when we come to consider this, which there will be a slight break whilst we have to do 1 or 2 other formal things before we come back to this. So is there anything else that you can add to shed any light on it?
A couple of points, because I think that will help. I think firstly, you call it the glass frontage there. In planning terms, that is a non-livable space. That is a circulation route, so nobody lives in that. There is no issue about overlooking, and it's also set quite a long way from the boundary. And I think that's really important to put that. It's probably about 10 metres, if not 12 metres away from the other building. So, you know, in terms of any of the new developments you've got across the way on Whitefield and other locations, that's a distance from one Bafflebourne property to another. There's a considerable distance there, but it's not a livable space.
So are you talking about the glass stairwell?
Yes.
Right, sorry.
So the point is, you don't sit in there looking out all day and staring at the neighbours. It is something you pass by, and that is the same as a bathroom window. That's the same as a landing window. They're not classed as habitable spaces, livable spaces that you sit and you're glaring at somebody from the side. So that's quite an important thing. The other thing is we've quite carefully looked at the position, and whilst we've acknowledged the building is set deeper than its counterparts, the important thing is there is a rule of thumb that comes into planning, which is a 45-degree angle from windows at the rear of the property. And there is no vision from the windows at the rear of the bungalow at the 45-degree doesn't intersect. So we have tried to address the planning guidance on this. The building primarily faces down the garden to the south. It does not have any windows that outlook to the east or the west. We've set it looking south. Yes, there are some glass, but that is to ancillary rooms and to the landing. So I think that's quite important to note. And the amendments that I've made subsequent that haven't been put onto the planning website due to East Northants planning shortages as usual, is that I have moved the property, I've rotated it closer to number 91's boundary, which is, it may cause other issues, but I've rotated it closer to that boundary, which gives a much greater separation between it and number 78, 87. 87. So that is quite important. Arguably, the building could be moved forward by a metre and reduce the size of the car parking at the front, and that would actually help as well.
Why only 1 metre?
Because we still need to get 3 cars in and manoeuvring, otherwise the planners will not accept it in terms of highways, which would have been the same for your application, I believe.
Is there anything else you want to add?
It is lower than your property as well. And we were very conscious to actually ensure that it's stepped down, albeit it is slightly lower, so it's not as high.
It's only very marginal though, isn't it?
It is lower. It could arguably come down a little bit more, but you know the point is
But does it need to be lower?
Can I? We can't get into a debate
No,
in a
yeah,
sense
sorry.
between the two of you. What we're trying to do at the moment is just get information. Is there anything else you want to add?
I've got nothing else to add now.
Mr. Jakeways, I know that you've provided us with
Thank you.
I'll give you that.
lots of material here for us to read.
To speak to the white sheet in any rate.
Yes, please do.
Thanks. My objection to this proposal is that although, of course, a fine house should be built on this attractive plot, it should be in keeping with the rest of the road from number 79 to number 91. The size, the scale, the style and the position of the proposal are inappropriate. The location next to my back garden, which is my principal concern, is made necessary simply by the style in which it's designed and the need for it apparently to be serially constructed. It's perfectly possible, as the others in the row and the current work at 91 show, to build a large house, 4 bedrooms, 5 bedrooms more, without interfering with any of the others there. I've given you the yellow sheet and I won't say much more about that except a couple of headlines from it, which are to do with exaggerations and inaccuracies in the text of the proposal. It's said to be a replacement. Actually, what's probably the smallest bungalow remaining in Elmore is apparently about to be replaced by something with 3 times the footprint and twice as high, which would then be amongst the largest private houses recently built in the town. A building 7 metres deep would become a building 17.5 metres deep. Various artists' drawings should really show the front elevation with no surrounding building. The text repeats that there's no proposed outlook or overshadowing issue, no amenity impacts. This is clearly not the case. A 2-storey building next to the top of our garden would block out the sun every summer afternoon and evening. There are references to the existing landscape of the plot remaining untouched. That's obvious nonsense as well. You've only got to look at what's going on very carefully in number 91 at the moment to see that what's left of the landscape by the time a building like this is put on a smaller plot won't be worth considering. There are also references in my yellow document to vehicular accidents and traffic issues. But as I said, I want to speak to the white sheet. These 2 diagrams are copied from the architect's drawings, and you've seen them one way or another up on the display. The small diagram on the right shows the general layout here. Number 89 outlined in red and the other houses. There are actually is a number 71 which isn't shown. It's the last one there down next to the playing field. The last diagram shows the location we're discussing, and I've put some numbers on my diagram which I've taken partly from the architect's drawing. Those are the ones in red, and some of my measurements are there in blue. There's a table on the right-hand side which puts the 2 of them together, merely so that I can boast that my work with the tape measurements are about that far different from the architecture professional stuff. So they're saying the same thing. So it shows that you've got a site 56 metres long, and the garden will be down to, I think, 26 metres in the new house if it goes that way. It shows the blue figures give you the size of my front garden, the size of my house, and the size of my garden. And there are 2 parallel red lines drawn. They're not quite the same as those lines that you saw on the display. The lower of the 2, the southernmost, if you like, near the bottom of the page of the 2, is simply drawn across what would be the 2-storey bit, the bottom of the end of the 2-storey bit of the new building. And the other one is drawn to show across onto the new building the back of my house, the bit that I live in. The other wibbly bit on the corner of the outline there is really a 1-storey garage. And I should say in passing that actually 1-storey and 2-storey is the issue here, because if you look at all the buildings on the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see they've all got sticky out bits at the bottom, which are all single-storey stuff. The back 2-storey line of everything, including number 91, is pretty well standard. And the distance between those two red lines I pointed out is 6.5 metres. Now, it's about the width of this room, I should think. Will be sticking out. You saw it in the photograph. It's a rotten photograph. It was a dark afternoon when it was, excuse me, taken. But you can see that something the size of the wall that you're looking at here will be next to my garden. And I should be sitting about where the people at the back of this room are sitting, having the barbie, sunbathing, or whatever it is that they choose to do in the garden. Generally with the clothes on. And I won't get any sunshine in the afternoon. I'm not, frankly, particularly concerned about, in practical terms, about being overlooked by somebody on that balcony. If he wants to come out in his pyjamas and stare at me in his swimming costume, that's a big problem. I am particularly concerned, though, that instead of looking out of the house and seeing some woodland and some trees and some light, I shall have this downgrade shadow on your right-hand side, which is not necessary, I repeat, I mean, that's the point. That you could build a house of that volume in another way if it weren't for the rather strange way in which it's being planned to be put together serially. Don't know if there are any questions about that.
Questions? If not, what I'm going to do is just revert at 9 o'clock to the published agenda, so to speak, so that we can do those formal bits we need to do. We'll then take this application first so that those of you who are interested in it can hear it and then depart, and then we've got a few other applications to look at as well. So, in terms of the formal bit, any... Yes, of course.
Can I put another half sentence in, which I didn't expect to actually put in? The notion of moving a couple of feet away doesn't make too big a difference.
Yeah, okay, understood. Right, the next item on the agenda is any declarations of interest, either any disclosable pecuniary interests or any other interests. I know that Councillor Oakes was trying to say something to me earlier.
Well, one of them is from a former councillor, David Wood.
Which one? Oh, 16 East Road. 16 East Road.
Yeah.
Right.
Look, I don't feel personally that I have to give a notice, but
I think that if we all note that fact, I mean, we probably all know him.
the other thing also is he's actively involved in other things.
He's involved with Transition
Outlook,
Outlook.
interact with us, Transition Outlook, etc. So,
well, perhaps, I mean, my wife also plays tennis with his wife, so perhaps on that basis I'll declare another interest because of knowing
well,
the
there we
applicant.
go.
But it's
I just thought that was worth.
I used to live at 81
I think the fact that you used to live somewhere is perhaps slightly less relevant, if I might respectfully suggest so. Okay, you can bring the benefit of that knowledge to bear in due course.
I might do.
Can I just say then, gentlemen, I wish to declare an interest as a former councillor.
What, with Mr. Wood?
Yeah.
Okay, well,
I'd rather do that
So-
on the safe side.
Okay.
two of us at least are declaring another interest on the basis that Mr. Wood is known to us both as a former councillor, and in my case, his wife and my wife know each other pretty well, so for the record. Right, and the other formal thing is the minutes of the meeting which were held, gosh, it seems a long time ago now, on the 3rd of December. Present were myself, Councillor Sue Oakes, Councillor Neville Oakes, Councillor Humphreys, Councillor Den and Councillor Chesser. So all of us who are here today were here then. Somebody want to propose? They're accepted. Councillor Chesser, seconded. Councillor Sue Oakes. All those in favour, please show. Just sign those off. Right. Although it's the second on our list, it would seem completely bonkers at this stage not to look at the application for South Road first. So, just to remind ourselves after all of that information, all it literally says on the planning application is replacement two-storey dwelling. So, 4 words, we must have spent a good half an hour hearing various things about it. So you want to kick off with a view? Please. Right, Councillor Oakes.
I think it's big. I don't like the loss of light for the neighbours and the fact that the property is so far deep into the south, into the garden. I do know South Road, and yes, there are houses being built, and it's all changing down there, but I'm not sure that I think it's just a little bit too big for me and in the wrong position, or needs to be moved.
So sort of.
It's the loss of for the neighbours.
Anybody else have a view?
Well, I think the fact that the people who developed in the 91 stuck to roughly what the building line is, the rear building line, tells you quite a lot, because they've been able to design and build a building which is similar in terms of the occupants being able to use it within the space that they decided to take. And this one has gone really rather beyond that, far too far into the back garden. And I think that, frankly, is my best effort in saying that it's too big at the back.
Looks like 2 houses joined together.
I think if you read your yellow sheet, that is almost exactly word for word what it says at one point. Other Councillor Humphreys? Or
yeah, it's the light, the light thing at the back that would, I don't think there's, I'm just trying to work out where the shadows would come, east, west and everything else like that, and there would be nothing for me more annoying than having the sun on a south-facing garden and having the sun disappear from it. But yeah, the other part of me is saying, well, we're in a different world now from when those houses were built, a very, very different world, and there's already sort of beginning of precedent set with 91. We're moving on. I think in time, all of these houses, all of those properties will change. In some of those parts will have 2 or 3 houses on in the end, as windfalls. I mean, the important part about it is the parking has been addressed adequately, because that's one of our major concerns. Yeah, I don't know. A bit of redesigning at the back, perhaps, to the garden light wouldn't go amiss. But I can see. I mean, I immediately saw from the plans that it's not a balcony as such. It's a sloping roof. It's not. It goes round. You can see it going round the building.
No, it is a walkway that's covered by a roof.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not intended to be walked.
It's an old-fashioned bungalow veranda as such in the traditional sense.
Yeah, but the reason I put on there, you know, my family owned houses which have got verandas, and invariably they're raised. So my only ever question was that, is this thing going to have a veranda at, ground floor, or is it going to be raised?
My point is about the balcony, the glass balcony bit.
Well, yeah, but that's south-facing largely, and doesn't really come
No,
in.
but one of your points raised was the fact that it would have a glass end if we look out into that garden, which in fact doesn't exist.
It would. I'm trying to point out everything here, if I can.
Yeah, but it's not on the plans as such, so...
No, it isn't.
Yeah, so that's...
It's on the plans, but I don't know what the construction is going to be. And also, possibly, all you've got to do there is say, well, we'll put some frosted stuff on the end. But you still then, people are going to be taller than the balcony, for obvious reasons. But I've been looking at the angles here. I don't see that as being that much of a problem for me. It's more of the overbearing aspect upon number 87 of the solid building itself. That is my assessment.
Jessica, have you a view?
That just seems so big.
There is a word that seems to be coming out here.
2 houses.
Well, maybe building lines don't exist anymore, I don't know.
They do.
Well, you
I'm not sure
primarily take the front building line is the one. I mean, the point is if you move it forward, everybody will say, well, you've moved it forward to the building line, so you know, there is a, you know...
Yeah.
May I just say, I spent about 45 minutes trying to work out whether there was any regulation to do with rear building lines.
Yes,
That's what I was looking at. And the answer was, unless you can tell me better, at least you're in the industry, as to whether there are any. And I couldn't find that there was.
There's a rule of thumb that the planners stick to, which is from the rear of the property adjacent, if there's a 45-degree line that's struck across, and if the building that's adjacent connects with that in terms of its principal walls, then there is good reason to object, because that is obscuring the view and the light. It's not sunlight you're stopping, it's not the overshadowing, it's daylight is the issue. And nobody can ever defend daylight, unfortunately. So,
Mark, could you point on that drawing, could you point out where your sort of 45-degree line is?
Oh, right.
Well,
I wish I'd known this before.
sorry,
No,
I just take a sheet of paper and...
while our friend's going out there, can I point out that the red line there is not the same as the red line I drew?
No.
That's the red line which goes to the single-storey bit in number 91, where, and I've said, and I think it's reasonable, that any single-storey building can go where it likes along that.
Just in terms of the 45-degree rule, this is not just
Yeah.
here.
I think that would be useful for
If you take a right angle to the rear wall of number 87, and you take the closest window, and you take a 45-degree line through there, if any of the principal elevations intersect that, or interfere with that, that is the planner's general rule of thumb. And that's what he will be guided by, and it's in their general rule of thumb.
So put it on again.
Well, I mean, I may do it inaccurately, but if you take the corner of a window, which is there, and you take a 45-degree line across there, you can see, and I've actually, my revised drawings, I've actually rotated this round, which moves this further away in response to the comments. And that is all I've done, because I'm playing with planning rules, and that's what I'm trying
Has
to
it got to be, two questions, has it got to be the nearest window or the furthest window? In other words, 45 degrees from a window nearest to the garage.
No, to the closest window to the corner. So
does it say anything about height?
Can I hesitate to stop the discussion, but
Useful to me.
somewhere along the line we're going to have to make a decision on this one, because I am conscious of the fact that we've got to 9:15 and we haven't actually got off the first planning application yet. So the feeling I'm getting is that people are worried about the overall kind of size and overbearing nature of the building rather than anything else. Now that's sort of slightly tantamount to talking about sort of whether it's out of keeping with the street scene and the general development. If I had to say to people, look, you've either got to say you object or you don't object, you are entitled to say no, in a sense no comment. But if you were having to say either object or not, what are people actually saying? Because it's one thing to say, I think it's a bit big. It is another thing to say, and because it is so big, I want to actually lodge an objection on that basis.
I object.
I object.
I object.
No comment.
I don't think we need one in the sense that there are 5 people sitting around this table and 3 people have expressed a view. So it would appear that the consensus is that we should object to the application on the basis that the overall size of this building is out of keeping with its neighbours, and therefore, were it to be scaled back, it might be a different issue, but that as it stands, we would object to it. And we'll see what the planning department make of it in due course. I hasten to say, for the benefit of the laypersons attending, that whilst we may object, it does not mean to say that's the end of the matter. We are purely a consultee. They will take on board our view and our objection. It does not mean to say it will be sustained. And I think we move on, but if everybody who has been connected with this now wants to take their leave, I'll give you all a moment to do so, so that we can then get ready to go to 10 Clifton Drive.
I actually would like to strongly object.
I didn't know whether help they were taking today. It was just to try and give you a better. So that's basically, you know, this red line that Councillor Oakes talked about. That is me stood on the scaffold, and that's the top of our single-storey orangery. And I'm not quite sure on Mike's house. This is Mike's house. So he said it would to here, the boundary line. Yeah, it comes to where this bush is. Yeah, but obviously this is single-storey, that's single-storey, and obviously this house is big. Yeah. But and also I don't know whether, when we put ours in, I mean I don't feel it's a little bit irrelevant to comment about our application, but when we put ours in, I deliberately drew up a house that was not going to be in any way offensive and was trying to pull all the good features of the building. And Dean Wishart, who was our case officer, said that it's been put in for a planning excellence framework for the council, which has no relevance to us, but it's good for the council. Simply because we didn't want to
Okay.
Yeah, and it just went through, but I don't know whether that's relevant. I haven't actually had any contact with him since, so I don't. But I'm
Well,
just.
I think we have to draw a line.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But I'm grateful
Yeah,
for your
thank you.
assistance.
And obviously we didn't really want, you know, we would have just spoken to them about this. We didn't really want to, you know, subject you to all this. But obviously in the absence of never having met them, it's too short. So I showed them, so I only did 2 of these.
Don't worry about it.
Look, I took the view, so that's tonight, I took that just for the light, but that's standing on our waterway, looking out, so basically that's the actual representation of what we've drawn there.
So I'm not there.
No, you're spot on, yeah, because obviously, we can't stand on that, that roof is not.
They're easy, aren't they?
Look into our conservatory, or can only do with what I'm not.
No, I didn't
You don't really have to say much on that first one because it's
Yeah, once again, it goes back to this.
I'm going to have to draw a hole here. Sorry. Thank you. Yeah.
David, if you wanted to go to the,
I'll put the top one at the bottom.
You put the top one at the bottom, yes, you said that. Right, okay.
Okay.
Right, we're going to see if we can try and press on rather rapidly with the rest of this, because I'm conscious of the time. And we're going to look, in fact, at 16 East Road next.
Yeah.
Which is a 2-storey side extension and single-storey rear extension and the replacement of the main roof. So that sounds fairly substantial.
It would be about
Get off that one.
racking up as fast as I can. Right, next bounce. What we got? Okay, here we go. And this is a former councillor Wood's application. Okay, that's where it is. Bottom of the bend, the bit just sort of northwest of it is the car park, which with the co-op. I've done a satellite. I always like to do satellites because sometimes they tell you things that plans don't. So we're looking at that. Very happy with the location. Very good. Okay. Next. I think this is quite an interesting thing. This is from the Heritage Impact Assessment, but I actually can confirm that they got that right, because I've had a look at our conservation area. It is actually right on the cusp of it, and it's not listed, so we don't go down that route. There you go. I said it doesn't appear to be listed. I always get a bit cheery about that. Okay, hopefully that will give you a good idea about what the house looks like as it is. That's a photograph, obviously I've taken, and you can see again north, south, and west. West is the bit that faces the road, obviously. So therefore the entrance to the house is not from the road, it's actually down that passageway area leading to the hall. And I put a little thing up there, that's where the garden is. Now the reason I do this now is because unfortunately the plans when they come in, they start with one thing and then they turn around. And it's very difficult to work out what you're looking at. Okay, so there we go. You can then see the entrance that I'd shown you on the previous photograph. The west there faces the road. You can see the garden at the back. And there you go. You've got the ground and first floor as it is at the moment. Next, the site plan and the ground floor. Now this is the proposal. Now again you can see I've put north, south, east and west on. And so you get the general idea of it. So you can see down where the garden is, which was the other way around on the previous slide. But basically the development is quietly situated behind the garden. And well, I'll move on to elevations and stuff, but you've now got some proposed plans for the first floor, upstairs and indeed the loft. But really, those are the existing plans and elevations. I'll just shift on rapidly. But this is what the proposal is. And you then got an idea about changing the roof line and the addition they wish to put on the two-storey bit, which is effectively round the back. You can see it. Now, neither of those are west frontages onto the road, so they're sort of tucked in round the back. Visual appearance, well, you've got a note there. If you see a look at the building on the left-hand side, and if you look carefully at the house itself, you'll see some red lines that have been drawn that show you a slight change in the roof structure and where the addition would poke out into the garden area. Are you happy with that? You get that?
I get it, yes, it's crammed on, isn't it?
Well, I think the important thing is to, and for me, the important thing is to sort of understand what impact it might have. And, well, I'll have to let the councillors make a decision on that. I've already made mine. Okay, and that's, I've gone to the next now.
So,
What do you think?
I'm
Councillor Chester.
wondering how they're going to get any kind of machinery, plant, building supplies, etc.
to do it.
into this property. Because you've only got that narrow, tiny little bit that wends round to the back. And they can't block the road just outside the main car park of the town.
Can I just say, I don't think it's that tiny. I'll just go back to the photograph. I think it's a very
I
good
mean, I
point.
must admit, where they were first building it, I thought, crikey.
Yeah, well, I'll just try and get back to the photograph.
That's it.
Right, you see, that's pretty.
Well, it looks generous, but it's not. It's just the angle it's photographed.
We can put a note in, I think we can put a note in to say we have a concern about it, but personally, I don't think that's a planning issue, that's more a practical.
Well, that comes into planning, doesn't it? Access to the site.
They wouldn't plan to knock down that wall.
But that'll be down to the planners probably, but it's certainly an aspect of it. Where would they lodge
If we leave, and I understand your reasons for the concern, and the thought that there were loads of contractors' vehicles outside for 3 or 4 months would not be a very appealing one on that stretch of road. But leave that aside, in terms of what is actually proposed in terms of the development of that building to make it essentially larger than it currently is. I guess the question has to be, since it is neither in the conservation area nor is it listed, is it overdevelopment on that side? Because unless it is, I'm not entirely sure I can see a basis for objecting to it. And I'm not sure that it is an overdevelopment of the site.
I have no objections to it.
No.
Yeah, I mean,
Do you think the roof will be improved? The roof line, because it looks a bit ugly to me at the moment.
Yeah, I think they'll be careful because that could be distorted.
Okay.
That might be the downsides.
It has no impact on the street scene as such.
It doesn't.
no, it doesn't.
I don't think it would.
I mean, as far as I'm concerned, they can make it look really horrible, I don't care. But I do worry about the access because of where it is.
I mean,
Oh,
it's sorry, my only it's you're absolutely right, Chair. That it's I think it's fine, and we should just move on with it. But I think there should be in our recommendations something, because we have to take into consideration East Road and the fact that there will be construction vehicles coming in now and more vehicles in there, and they would all be using the car
I
park.
was just going to say.
So
They're all
if
parking
there is
in
something,
park.
if there was any way we could remediate that, that would be useful, I think.
Yeah, I think the other thing is, of course, you've got the issue of skips.
Yeah.
Well, all those things.
All of a
Well,
sudden
what
you
was-
find Mr. Skip is going to appear down there.
If we said that there would be no objection, but that we ask that appropriate conditions are put in for the construction phase to ensure that there aren't skips left out on the roads.
No skips
That,
on the road then, due to access
Yeah,
to the
because of the impact on the
Because we've got
roadway
huge
itself.
arctics that try to get in as
And
it is.
flag up our concerns, and then those
think
who
that-
understand these things probably rather better than us can actually perhaps come up with a scheme.
I think eminently sensible.
Okay. On we go. Right. Now, the next application is slightly unusual because it involves the placement of a tree preservation on a particular tree. And it is worth just mentioning that this tree was on our agenda before.
Yeah.
And when it came up, we objected
Yeah.
to its removal, essentially saying that we didn't agree that it was necessary and we didn't want to see it go unless the tree officer took a different view. Well, it's quite apparent that the tree officer has taken a view, because not only does the tree officer not want it to go, but wants to protect it by putting a TPO on it. Now, I should say that the applicant has been in touch with me directly with regard to this, quite in a sense upset that the town council had objected to the thing in the first place, and I made the point at that stage, because I didn't actually know that although we had said we objected, it was subject to the view of the tree officer, and if the tree officer took a contrary view, it was quite obvious that the district council would go along with that. However, the tree officer has taken a view, and the tree officer clearly thinks that this tree is worth preserving. And I question whether, in fact, we are able to say, if this is a recommendation, if you like, from the tree officer, that this should happen, particularly bearing in mind the comments we made before, it would seem extraordinary to now object to a tree preservation order being placed upon this particular tree.
I think the only thing we can say is we welcome.
Yeah, we're very pleased.
I think
The outcome.
So we actually support,
Yeah.
we actually support the making of the TPO, not just not objecting to
I
it.
think this is the first time this ever happened in someone, and you know, I think it shows, from my point of view, it shows the worth of having a tree officer on the district council, and they do invaluable work. It should be applauded.
And they're on the case.
Right, well, we can move swiftly on and have a few more trees, which hopefully will speed up this agenda. In the aptly named Cherry Orchard Yard at 17 Bennefield Road, and there's a whole load of things which no doubt we'll go through.
Right, you've got the whole 9 yards there. Right, this is a note to Amy Pearson from, not from us, but they're saying that there's no trees visible. Now, the one thing I've always been annoyed about is that you just don't get enough information about tree applications at all, ever. So that's it really. I'm now down at 7 Cockstock Road. Basically,
sorry, could you go back?
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, basically it's the same as the thing in your agenda.
Yeah, which seems to be a
You can see it there.
There is a picture there.
Yeah, I've got a picture.
a small amount of what might be called tree husbandry, but what actually seems to be being suggested is a number of removals due to being quote-unquote a poor specimen and to allow extra light to get to other trees. Then we've got a dead dying tree removers, and then remove as is not aesthetically pleasing, which is interesting,
Sorry, but tough.
and remove to ground level, etc.
It's a tree.
As it is non-native and an eyesore, the conifer hedge. Now, it does strike me that if ever there was an application that we should say that we defer to the view of the tree officer, it is probably this one. And do we really want to say anything else?
No, that's fine.
Fine.
Yeah, I think we could say that it
But the thing
needs very firm scrutiny.
The thing is that's annoying now is I had to do a reasonable amount of digging just to get that up.
Yeah.
Any time a tree application comes in, you get very, very little
Yeah.
from.
Well, it's something that we perhaps could and should take up
I'm not
separately.
thinking about the
And I know we've done it before. Yeah. So what would...
I've done it 3 times now. If I go up again, it'll be number 4. Saying that this side of what you've got there is not good enough. Doesn't give us enough information.
Maybe we should do it formally up, say, through NALC.
Well, the other thing is that sometimes you see that I have a rule that I do not go onto premises which are privately owned without their permission. Now, some of these tree applications mean that I'd have to do that in order to take photographs of each and every tree, whatever else, so we can actually see it. It's always great if I can do that. I get to understand a little bit more about owner property, but more than that, I'm able to say, this is the tree that's dead and dying, this is the... but I can't do it.
Yeah.
There you go.
All right, well, look, what we'll say is that we would want the tree officer to consider carefully whether any of the planned removals are required, and if they are, that we would then not object, but otherwise, unless the tree officer considers that there is a good reason for removal, our position is we wouldn't want removal. As to those matters which are more like tree husbandry, we wouldn't object. So where it talks about raising to allow more light into a neighbouring garden, I don't think we'd probably object to that. Remove an overweight limb to help prevent failure in the future, we wouldn't no doubt be objecting to that, but the other stuff we would.
Okay.
Potentially. Right, let's go back to buildings. 7 Cottesstock Road, construction of 2-storey side extension and a single-storey rear extension, remodel and increase the height of the existing porch feature, removal of chimney stack, replacement of existing windows, rendered finish to existing and proposed elevation, new roof covering to existing dwelling, which sounds fairly comprehensive.
It does. There it is. That's the property we're looking at. My photograph. Plenty of parking space. We're always worried about parking. Right. The neighbouring property is up there. It's nothing to do with this, but there's the plans of the property as is. What we're intending to do. Well, basically, fiddle about with the this, that and the other. You can see the changes that are marked in red, really. So, possibly demolished.
Probably just about doubling the footprint.
Proposed changes are obviously in red.
Isn't it?
Not much point in going any further, really.
I mean, it's quite a large plot,
Yes.
which would take it. There are a number of quite substantial properties along Cotterstock Road. I'm struggling to see any real reason to object to any of it.
Thank you.
No?
I've got the... It's an interesting thing. I just put these up just for amusement. Chimney stacks to go. Why would they want to take chimney stacks away? There's a reason for that. I'll come to that when we come to another thing. But that's just a point I made. But basically, the changes are for a property this size and its location. They're just basically rejigging it. They're not really doing an awful lot, I can see.
Okay, no objection. Planning outcomes, well, they're all printed. We've already talked about the tree at 15 Mill Road, which we've already looked at because we've now approved the idea of the TPO. You'll see what happened with other things that we commented upon. There are no planning appeals of which I am aware, which brings us to any other relevant matters.
I'll just quickly chunk through this.
But there is, yes, you're quite right. I was so keen to move on that I did forget that we had deferred to the back of the agenda the first one on our list, which was at 10 Clifton Drive, which is a garage conversion to create a large ground floor WC shower room and home office. It's an LDP. Councillor Oakes and I had a conversation on Sunday about LDPs.
Local development plan. No, yeah, okay.
So we ought to look at that as
Can I
well.
have a quick look at this one? I mean, just this is not on the agenda necessarily, but this is just mainly for information and update. We had no objection. There are just minor changes from that. No, it's not on the agenda, but it's one of the things that cropped up on their website. No, 10 Clifton Drive, we were wrapped with this. No chance, no trouble here at all. Okay, there it is. You can see it. Hopefully. Okay, it's a garage conversion. Existing site plan is there. Right, okay. Plenty of parking. We're always worried about parking. The double garage doors are going to be removed and then replaced by what effectively a study and a work area and stuff. Incidentally, all over the place now, the garages are no longer garages really. There we go. I've got to put that in. Why on earth do the architects always put a Porsche as a car, as representing a car? But they just do. I just think it's very funny. Right, okay, next. Nothing much to say about it. We don't even need to, to comment on it. Rapidly on to another additional thing. That's the end, because that bit, there's nothing to interest us at all. It's all a bit technical and nothing particularly structural about it.
Just going back to 10 Clifton Drive, obviously the only concern would be There is clearly a loss of parking, but it does appear that there's probably sufficient parking on site to take
There's
two
tons.
vehicles anyway.
Yeah.
So I don't think that the mere fact they can't be put away in a garage need concern us too much. Councillor Oakes has mentioned the word neighbours. It's not something we've actually said for anything up to now, but perhaps on this one just to ask, are we aware of any objections from any neighbours to what's
Oh, my big caveat.
with the usual caveat?
No,
So,
no,
we're
it's
not aware of that. Does anybody
I
have a
think it was
problem with
quite a
what's
good
suggested?
spot, actually.
Although it's probably a formality in any event.
No objection.
No objection. Right. Well, I was very keen to try and get us to the end. The last bit is any other relevant matters to report, because we are
Well,
at
thank you.
near 20 to 10. This is at least an hour later than we usually manage,
It's like a public
or around
meeting.
about that, but we got off to a rather unusual start, shall we say. So, Councillor Humphreys, Councillor Chester,
No, no, thank you.
So,
Lisa.
Oh,
Right.
I feel quite exhausted.
In that case, I'll declare the meeting closed at 9:40. I've got one, thanks.
Are you still
Thank you all.
recording?